So, whatever happened to everyone's favorite land roaming vehicle from the classic sci fi TV show Lost in Space? Let's find out. Movies,
Music and monsters.
Hey guys, Dan Monroe here, talking about movies, music, and monsters. Oh man, the Chariot from Lost in Space. This is going to be a good one, so strap yourselves in and let's go. Irwin Allen's Lost in Space ran from 1965 until 1968 on the CBS network and was not only immediately adored by children, but even the critics gave it 2 thumbs up for its originality, imagination, and wholesome family entertainment. Even though after the spectacular black and white first season, the show took a hard left turn towards bizarre and often silly storylines, the technology presented in the show was not only creatively inspiring at the time, but also looked really cool on TV screens back in the 60s and still does today. We had spaceships, space pods, laser pistols, laser rifles, flying jetpacks, force field generators, and even robots that play chess. However, one piece of incredible Lost in Space technology that clearly sparked my imagination as a kid was the all-terrain roaming vehicle, the Chariot. I mean, this thing was so cool. Not only was it capable of withstanding the incredible weather and landscape of the Robinson planet, but it also transformed into a water vehicle to circumnavigate inland seas and even whirlpools. It had this large circular dome on the top that you could slide back to shoot giants. It had navigational and climate control features, as well as a spot in the back for our very own beloved B9 robot. I mean, come on, what's not to love? But what a lot of people may not know is that there was not just one, but 3 different versions of the Chariot that were created to bring these super cool episodes to life. Sadly, so many of our favorite classic movie and TV show props ended up, you know where? The junk pile. And this might be the first time I've ever been able to say this, but literally all 3 of these versions of the Chariot still exist. So, let's dive in. The Lost in Space Chariot was first seen in the pilot episode No Place to Hide that Irwin Allen used to sell the series to CBS. The full-scale Chariot was a prop constructed from a 1964 Snowcat sprite. 20th Century Fox actually picked up a bunch of these vehicles for use in the film Caprice starring Doris Day, so the creative genius of art director Bill Creber went to work and redesigned one of these Snowcats as the Chariot for Lost in Space. The designs for the Chariot were finalized and approved on December 17, 1964, and believe it or not, the special effects team only had 2 weeks to build this incredible prop. 2 weeks. Wow. This enormous snowcat was 8 feet wide with rubber wheels that ran on the inside of a revolving track of metal cleats. The original cab was removed and replaced with a custom frame of 1-inch square steel tubing, specifically designed to withstand the weight of a full-grown man, since a lot of times the actors would have to climb up on the roof for one reason or another. The frame was then encased in clear acrylic sheeting.
They wanted to show the water coming over the Chariot. So they dumped 4 or 5 or 6 50-gallon drums of water on this thing to have it look as though we were drowning. Well, what they hadn't accounted for was the fact that this thing was not watertight. The water all came into the thing as we were sitting there and began to rise, like sitting in a bathtub. And we were screaming and laughing and carrying on. And of course, all our clothes were soaked, our hair was soaked.
In addition to the full-size Chariot prop, the special effects department also built not 1, but 2 different miniatures of the Chariot. This first smaller 16-inch Chariot miniature was the one that they used for long-distance shots of the Chariot caught in the whirlpool and also floating in the inland sea. The second Chariot was much larger, about double the size at around 33 inches. This was the one we saw when the Chariot enters the water of the inland sea, as well as all those super cool shots of the Chariot with the giant. Both of these Chariot miniatures had those really neat little figures of the cast inside, and the larger of the two even had a little miniature B9 robot. This is awesome. The figures were created by the legendary sculptor and model builder Marcel Delgado, who made the armature for the original stop-motion King Kong puppet in 1933. How cool is that? If you guys are into King Kong, a couple of months ago I did a whole video on what happened to all the King Kong miniatures. Check it out. Link in the description. You know, Irwin Allen may have been a lot of things, but one thing he definitely was smart. Even though the pilot and the first season were filmed in black and white, Irwin knew the possibility existed that color might soon be in the show's future, so he decided to shoot most all of the special effects shots, including the Jupiter 2, the Giant, the Jetpack, and the Chariot, in glorious color. So the Chariot was loaded onto the back of a flatbed truck and taken out to the expansive valley with the Trona Pinnacles. This is where all that really awesome color footage of the Chariot was filmed, as well as all the spectacular aerial footage that was taken from a helicopter. This awesome color footage of the Chariot, along with all the other color footage taken at the same time for the pilot, was continuously used throughout the 3 seasons of Lost in Space. Then, eventually, when Lost in Space was canceled, all 3 of these incredible versions of the Chariot went back into cold storage at 20th Century Fox, until about 10 years later when Fox decided to sell off a lot of its old props that had literally been sitting in their warehouses for years. And believe me, that was a mighty good thing. Otherwise, all this incredible stuff would literally have just been thrown out. So, let's jump ahead 60 plus years in the future and find out where these amazing props are today. The smaller 16-inch version of the Chariot miniature ended up with legendary producer and ultimate Lost in Space fan, Kevin Burns. This guy basically brought Lost in Space back to the forefront in the 1990s. Without Kevin, we wouldn't have gotten the shows on DVD or Blu-ray, the amazing cast reunions in 1990 and 1995, the licensing for all those amazing toys and models over the last 20 years, and not to mention he was the guy who rescued and restored the original Hero Lost in Space robot. Again, I did a deep dive all about what happened to the Hero robot from Lost in Space. Check it out, link in the description. Anyway, Kevin Burns had this 16-inch Chariot in his collection for years, until he unfortunately passed away back in 2020. These amazing photos of the smaller Chariot miniature clearly show what incredible condition it was still in after more than 55 years. And again, this was the miniature that was used in the whirlpool and all the scenes floating on the inland sea. This incredible model eventually sold at auction in 2023 for an astounding $93,000. Who eventually ended up with it, I have no idea, but it's great to know that it still exists. Now, as far as the larger 33-inch Chariot miniature, that particular model was owned by legendary prop maker Greg Jean. Again, you can see from these amazingly stunning photos that the prop was in unbelievable condition with most all the original interiors and characters inside, including the robot. Greg Jean was also the guy who owned the long-distance stunt robot and restored the original Hero robot for Kevin Burns back in 1990. And sadly, we recently just lost Greg Jean as well. This larger Chariot model also eventually sold at auction again in 2023 for a whopping $162,000. Again, who bought it? Your guess is as good as mine, but the fact that both these miniatures still exist is not only super cool, but super lucky. Okay, but what happened to the enormous full-size Chariot prop? Well, in the early 1970s, a Lost in Space fan named Chris was skiing with a friend in Big Bear, California, when he happened to notice that one of the large pieces of equipment on the property looked suspiciously like the Chariot from Lost in Space. Coincidence? I mean, come on, there's no way, right? Well, believe it or not, that's exactly what it was. It was in pretty bad shape. The top section of the Chariot was removed, but still existed. Most of the glass was destroyed, and this beautiful piece of sci-fi history was literally being used to move snow and drag trees around. Then, a couple of years later, when the slope went out of business, Chris was able to purchase what was left of the Chariot and relocated it to his home, where it's still, even all these years later, in the process of being restored to its former glory. Absolutely unbelievable. So, that's the incredible story of all three versions of the Chariot from Lost in Space. However, the story of the Chariot certainly doesn't end there, and there's no way I could do a video on this incredible prop without mentioning this unbelievable chapter. In 2015, a diehard Lost in Space fan named John Antonellis and his team at Elevator Interior Design from Lynn, Massachusetts, built a current-day, one-of-a-kind, exact one-to-one replica of the Chariot. I mean, this thing is gorgeous. Even Kevin Burns was so enthusiastic about this project that he sent John and his team copies of the original Chariot blueprints from the 20th Century Fox archives. This amazing full-scale replica does occasionally tour around to certain shows or events, so if you ever get the chance to see this unbelievably magnificent machine in person, trust me, do it. And if you can't afford to build your own full-scale replica, I mean, who can? There are tons of fantastic toys and models on the market today that you can buy to satisfy that inner Will Robinson inside every Lost in Space fan out there. But that still wasn't the end of the Chariot. In 2018, Legendary Television, along with Kevin Burns and Synthesis Entertainment, began production on a brand new updated version of Lost in Space for Netflix, which not only included a brand new cast, a brand new robot, but also a brand new Chariot for all of us to enjoy. But that, my friends, is the topic of another video. I really hope you guys enjoyed that deep dive into whatever happened to all the Chariots from Lost in Space. And if you did and you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing. I've got a whole ton of new videos coming up that I know you guys are just going to dig. As always, if anybody has any questions, drop them down in the comments section and I will do my best to try to answer them for you. And please feel free to stop back anytime as we continue our conversation on movies, music, and monsters.
Movies, music, and monsters.